For months now, an African big cat and a central Indian forest have been making the headlines. This September, almost 70 years after the Asiatic cheetah in India went extinct, 8 African cheetahs were released in the Kuno National Park in Madhya Pradesh. The project has been widely celebrated as the world's first intercontinental translocation. But was it so? Few know that 2022 is not the first time an African big cat has stepped foot in Kuno. There's an unlikely link between Kuno and Africa, a story that goes back nearly 120 years. The year was 1900. Lord Curzon, the Viceroy of India, was scheduled to visit the princely state of Junagadh in Saurashtra, where he hoped to bag a lion in Gir, by then the only place in the world where he could have come across an Asiatic lion. However, when the plan was publicized, there was much outcry against it, given the already decreasing lion population. So Curzon abandoned his lion shooting plans and set his eyes on the tigers of Gwalior instead. It was while hunting here that Curzon made a remarkable suggestion to the Gwalior Maharaj, Sir Madhavrao Sindhe. He suggested that lions be reintroduced in these forests. After all, the last Central Indian lion had been shot only 27 years ago near Guna, that lay just across Gwalior state's border. Sindhya was convinced lions would return to Central India, lions would return to Gwalior. The only source for Asiatic lions then was Junagadh, in present-day Gujarat. However, in a curious case of the past mirroring the present, just as Gujarat steadfastly refused lions to Madhya Pradesh for Kuno, the Nawab of Junagadh turned down Gwalior's request as well, arguing that there were too few lions to spare. A determined Madhavrao turned to Africa, just as more than a century later, Gujarat's refusals would make Madhya Pradesh look towards Africa. With a little help from Curzon, 10 young African lions soon arrived in India in early 1906. Some from Kenya, courtesy the Maasai tribesmen, others in all likelihood from Sudan. After 2 years in captivity, the lions began being steadily released into the forest of Kuno. By 1910, 8 lions had been turned loose. However, they soon turned man-eaters and reportedly killed 29 people. When Madhavrao heard of the killings, he instructed his head shikari, a Frenchman named Auret, to recapture the lions rather than having them shot. Not an easy task. Auret and his team devised a unique plan. They pinned the lions down to the vicinity of the village where they had made their last kills and plastered innumerable extra sticky flypapers across all the possible exit routes. When the lions tried to escape, they got flypapers on their feet. When they tried to scrape them off with their teeth, the paper stuck to their neck and manes. Soon, they were covered in flypapers, could barely see as a result, and were then netted and carted back to their former enclosures. Not all lions were, however, captured. Some dispersed across the forest of Kuno. The captive lions, on the other hand, were held for the next 10 years in a stone-walled enclosure at Dobkund, which lies within present-day Kuno National Park. Incidentally, the remains of Dobkund enclosure still survive. The most authentic account of the last phase of the Gwalior experiment comes from Colonel Kesari Singh, head of the Shikar department of Gwalior and one of the most famous hunters of his era. He recounted that Dobkund's captive lions had bred between 1911 and 1920, and by 1920 there were a total of 12 in captivity. In August 1920, a pair was once again released into the forest of Kuno. It promptly disappeared. A second pair, however, hung around the Kund after release, which led to an interesting incident that Singh describes in some detail. The forests around Kuno were fecund tiger habitats. The roars of the lions from the enclosures attracted wild tigers, and the only thing that stood in between these two big cats were the enclosure walls. However, after the lions were released, at least once, the tigers and lions seemed to have squared off. According to Singh, the male lion from the second pair they released was brutally mauled and killed by a tiger, while the lioness disappeared. Over the next few months, 6 more lions were released who vanished into the wilderness. But when it was time to release the last pair, marking the culmination of the grand experiment of almost 20 years, things did not go as planned. The last pair turned to the cattle of Kuno's villages and eventually killed a man. For Singh, this was the final straw. He marched to the village and shot both the lions on the spot. The remaining 9 lions disappeared into the vast forest of Kuno. Over the next few years, Gwalior's African lions travelled far and wide. One was reportedly seen in the forest of Savai Madhopur, now better known as Ranthambore Tiger Reserve. Another was reportedly seen close to the Indore state's border. They were eventually shot in several places far apart: Kota, Panna, Jhansi. In 1925, a lioness was shot on the banks of the river where it had all started, Kuno. It is almost certain that these African lions bred in the wild before being shot out. Alleged sightings continued in this landscape right until the early 1960s. So that was the story of what actually was the world's first intercontinental translocation project. But was Gwalior the first and the last to conduct such experiments? What if I told you that in 1939, the king of Nepal decided to introduce lions in the Terai forest of Chitwan? What happened to those Terai lions? Well, that is a story for another day.